Dudes, what's happening, man? This is Trent. I've been a concept artist in the video game industry for a long time. And so, of course, I'm getting a lot of emails from people who are students at an art school or something like that. I don't know what this is. Is it like teachers just don't want to do the work, so they tell their students to like, hey, go bug a pro, ask them a bunch of questions about their daily routine and try to get some insight into what it's like. And sure, it's good. It's good to talk to a pro, find out the truth about it. But that's the whole reason I have a YouTube channel. So I thought I'd just summarize a lot of the questions. And if I do this in one video, then I don't have to write back to everybody who asks me, because this is like 5 times a month. And it's a certain periods of time in the year. And you've probably written to me and I didn't write back. Why? Because I get a million of these questions. It's the same list of questions. By the way, I'm not a concept artist so much anymore. I did it for many years. I run a business now. But when I'm answering questions about what my day-to-day is like, you don't want to hear about the boring business contract stuff. You want to hear about the concept art job. So I'm going to be answering it from the perspective of when I was doing this full time as a concept artist, okay? So the first question is, describe the day-to-day tasks, functions, and responsibilities of a concept artist. What does a typical day look like? Now, when I was working in-house, which is slightly different during lockdown times, but when I was working in-house, most of the studios, of course, they start at like 10 a.m., which is kind of a late start by most of the world standards. But in the game industry, a lot of people end up staying. It's like their whole life is kind of there. So a lot of people will stay all the way until 8 p.m. So you get in, and a lot of times you got your list of stuff that you need to get done. Now, I was a senior concept artist at most of the studios I worked at, like Blizzard and Riot. And so there wasn't like a morning meeting, but sometimes they do that sort of a thing. It's just everybody like making sure that they're all synced up. And your usually response is like or your only really responsibility is to what the lead tells you need to be doing that day, or what your producer is telling you. Usually producers organize your day-to-day stuff. And so like producers will say, you should be working on that character skin design today. And then, I better check with so-and-so. You got to be proactive and like go and talk to the people that are necessary for you to get all the information you need. And so like you probably, usually there's like a meeting after that, meetings after meetings. Yeah, there's a lot of meetings at in-house game development. And sometimes your manager will have meetings. It's a lot. It's like 50% of your time at a game studio is meetings. And well, you're probably thinking, well, that's an awful lot of meetings. I don't want to do a lot of meetings. Well, I'll tell you what, I agree. And that's why I actually like working from home. And it's mostly like, hey, well, we got to keep everybody on the same page. We got to make sure that the game designer is talking to the artist who's talking to the 3D lead for the environment or whatever it is that you're working on, and that every different department is working in conjunction. And there's no simple way to answer this question, because sometimes you're doing user interface and sometimes you're doing character skins. Sometimes you're doing loading screens or splash art, things like that. You never know exactly what you're going to be working on depending on what your skill set is. These days at the bigger studios, you're going to also get more compartmentalized type of structure. So you might just get hired to do props, and that's all you're really going to be doing. It's actually a lot less meetings, and it's a lot less of the headache than the person who, for instance, is doing the monster design, who has to go through the approval process, which is going to be different at different studios. The approval process at Blizzard, for instance, is that you present your concepts to the art director, and you present your concepts to the lead of that department. If it's environments, you present your concepts to the person who's managing that task. And that's sort of a top-down hierarchical structure of approval. And that's sometimes preferable. Sometimes you do group meetings, but these are much more common at places like Riot, where it's a much more of a flat structure. And I don't know what it's like now, but when I was working there, you would bring in your concepts of, towers, for example, and say you spent, 2 days working on a bunch of towers. You present them to a group of 12 to 15 people, and everybody's got weigh in on that. So if somebody says, well, I like the tower, I wish that tower looked more like this other thing. And if everybody else in the room goes, ooh, I like that idea, well, then you've got to kind of chase that squirrel for a little while. And unfortunately, there's also sometimes multiple people working on the same task. So you're not really owning it, and you're going to throw out a lot of stuff. And the company doesn't really care if you get burned out about that. Usually it's just sort of like, hey, that's your job. Just create tons and tons of iterations of things until you can dazzle everyone. And so the more you can dazzle everyone, everything that you're learning in school should be how to dazzle people with your ideas and your skill in painting. You're usually, throughout your day, you're getting about, depending on the size of the studio and how many meetings you got, you're lucky if you get about 4 or 5 hours of painting time per day in a 9-hour workday. When I say 9-hour workday, I'm including the hour that you get for lunch. Lunch is usually a time to bond with your team. It's very important, and it's a good idea to actually have lunch with people from cross departments, unless if your managers discourage that. Some studios are going to say, hey, you can't do that. We don't want you talking to the programmers or whatever. I don't know why, but sometimes they do that. But then you get back from lunch and it's immediate. Like, that's the most productive period of time that I found, was like right after lunch hour up until about maybe 5 o'clock. And then a lot of times they'll have a meeting at the end of the day for whatever reason. If they don't, then, whatever the case, usually you do end up working late. Although this has changed a lot, at some of the more modern studios. They don't want you working too much overtime. They've run into a lot of, heat for doing overtime. The new generation of game developers weren't going to stand for the stuff that us old guys put ourselves through. So now you usually, you're not usually working more than that 9-hour day. But a lot of times you have to go home and start to continue to study, basically. So you'll be doing tutorials and workshops on how to improve your skills, how to make yourself more valuable so that you can be a valued member of the team. So your whole life, it becomes very consuming because it's such a competitive field, especially now. So you're pretty much your whole life, you have to commit to this for 10 to 15 years. It's a very long period of time. It does get easier once you, if you plan out your finances well and you get on a few successful titles, and if you're able to plan out these days you can live very affordably in various other places of the world. So, it does get easier, as you get older. And I know a lot of my friends waited to have kids until they're in their 40s because, it's really hard to have a family while working in video games in your 20s and 30s. In short, I also want to say, this is going to be different at different studios. Some studios are going to emphasize work-life balance. And there are people who are probably listening to this going, damn, why would you work at a place like that? But it's just what we went through. It's hard. And we paid our dues. And, that's worth some respect. Damn it, no. But certainly, I think that there are other options. If you're feeling like you're really being not treated well, you can work at a different studio, because there are other studios who do emphasize work-life balance, and they just staff up more. The way I run my team is none of my artists ever work more than they want to or need to. We're all on contract. So if an artist is like, hey, I just need 2 months off, okay, I find a different artist to fill in for them. Or if they're just like, hey, I'm really burned out on these types of tasks, I bring in more people on the team to make sure that the client's happy, that they're getting everything they want on time, and the artists are not burning out. But I think good management is hard to find in the game industry. That's all I'll say about that. But it's going to be different at different studios. It's going to be different at different roles. For instance, there's less pressure on the prop concept artist than there is on the main character or hero or monster character designer. Those are the most in-demand roles. They don't pay more, but they're way more stressful. So that's why I tend to avoid those types of situations. I create my own stuff on my own time now. But you should also be aware that some studios don't allow you to work on your personal projects outside of the office. They own everything that you do. And I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I think it's so essential for you to have your own thing going on the side and build a future for yourself, because the sad truth of it is as much as you want to be a part of the family of a business, when they're done with you, you're done. You get a manager who doesn't like you, and it doesn't matter how long you've been there, they'll get rid of you if they need to save money or whatever reason, budget cuts, stockholders demand that they lay people off, whatever reason. It's still a business. Never forget that. And so I could go on for hours about all the different situations that a concept artist finds themselves in, but I'll just summarize it by this. Your job as a concept artist is to serve the needs of the team. That doesn't mean you get to come in and start directing the direction of the game. These are not the days of Tetsuya Nomura. You don't get to doodle something on a napkin and say, hey, that's your new character, your new main hero. No way. It has to go through a lot of approvals, and there's a lot of people vested in that game, especially if it's a high profile game. If you want to do, if you're a visionary concept artist with your own ideas of what kind of game you want to make, just focus all of your attention on making indie games, building your own company, because that's going to be the only way you're going to be able to do that. Unless if your artwork is just dazzling. Yeah, you got to be at the top of your game. Okay, the next question is, what projects are you currently working on? And you ask a concept artist that, you might get them fired. The thing is we're always working on some top secret stuff. And I can't really talk about some of the secret stuff, but I can tell you about things that we're doing that have been announced. Let's see, earlier this year, we worked on Fortnite. We were working on the big Atlantis expansion. We did a lot of concept art for that, and most of it you'll never see, but that's cool. We're honored to have been a contributor to, one of the greatest games in history. One of the most, I'd say it's like part of the zeitgeist. It's still there. I think it's still at the top. So we're very pleased to have been able to contribute to that. We're working on Legends of Runeterra. So if you see new maps for Legends of Runeterra, we're likely involved in those. We do a lot of the icons and user interface and some of the card backs and a lot of graphic design type of stuff for that. That's just one of the things that is easy to outsource, I suppose you'd say. But we've been involved with Legend of Runeterra for 8 years. I did some of the first earliest concept art for that, and you'll never see it because it just gets buried. But we worked on Overwatch earlier this year. We did a bunch of sprays for some of their events, some of their holiday events. A lot of times, we do a good chunk of sprays for Overwatch. Man, I'd say in the last few years, we've done, probably like over 500 or 600 sprays for Overwatch. So a lot of times when you get those packs, you're looking at Aquatic Moon art, and that's a lot of that is Danny or Cotton, artists that I work with. I work with about 5 or 6 different artists at any given time. Mostly I'm art directing these days. So what else are we working on? Nothing else I can talk about. We're doing, I'm doing a new comic book. I'm bringing Creed back, which was a comic that I started when I was a teenager. And I'm doing an art book for Twilight Monk, which is like the sequel to the first art book, which is based on a series of illustrated novels that I've written. The Secrets of Kung Fulio is my newest illustrated novel that just came out. So I'm more of a storyteller and a world builder these days. And I like to own my own worlds a lot more. That's why I'm leaning more in that direction. It just seems to make sense. I got my start in comics, so it made sense to go back to it. So those are the things that I can talk about. There's three other projects that I'm working on that I can't talk about because they're either top secret, we're under NDA, or they're just not, I'm not ready. I can't even, you ask me about my new project. I can't even talk about it. It's top secret stuff. Keeping NDA is very important for a concept artist. If you leak something, you could lose your job for that. All right, next question. This one is, describe some of the pros and cons of being a professional concept artist. Such as the biggest challenges and greatest joys. The greatest joy of making concept art for video games is when you're working with a team of pros. They carry it, man. And when you see your sketches or your paintings in 3D and it comes to life, and then players are interacting with those characters and interacting with those environments, it's a joy. I mean, there's no greater feeling of accomplishment than seeing the game come together from, seeing a team put it all together and then putting that into players' hands and having players run around in this world that it was really just a painting. Like a lot of the games that I worked on, from Diablo 3 to League of Legends, they're mostly like they're paintings. They're 3D paintings, representations of paintings that we did. So that's extremely rewarding when you see that, and it's a collaboration amongst many people. And so seeing a well-oiled machine of highly talented people come together, it's just such a treasure. Some of the challenges that you're going to face that a lot of artists aren't going to be able to handle is that these days there's so many concept artists that sometimes bigger companies, they kind of treat concept art like it's disposable. So they'll say, hey, we're going to put 4 concept artists on trying to design this creature, and you're all competing. It's like gladiator stuff. You're just in there duking it out while still trying to be a team player. And that can be very demoralizing to artists, but they don't care because there's like, hey, there's many more other concept artists. I was reminded many times at some of those studios that, hey, if you don't want to keep throwing your artwork into the void, we can find somebody else who would be happy to do it. And so like you have to become detached from your ideas. And that's like the hardest part, is like building confidence in your work after so much of it gets torn apart by so many different people with different tastes and different interests and different ideas of where the game should be going. And a lot of times they're trying to get promoted, or they're trying to leave an impact on the game themselves. So they're thinking that critiquing your artwork or your character designs is going to help them get promoted, that they're going to show that they have great taste. And to some extent, sure, but that's not exactly great for you building your confidence. It's just a consequence of being in a role that is like a service role. You're a support role for your game development team. The concept artist is not the director. The concept artist doesn't get to achieve their vision for the game unless, of course, if you start your own game studio, which is exactly what I decided to do. But starting your own game studio is, there's more problems involved in that, because then you're constantly hunting for reliable people. And this is why I'm always saying that there's a shortage of good concept artists in the game industry, because 95% of the people who apply for a concept art job don't understand what the role is. They don't have the rendering skill or quality, and they think that I'm going to teach them. And I'm not. I hire people. Companies hire people who already know what they're doing. Companies don't hire people that they have to train up. Question number 4. What were some of your early roles in the field? This is a good question, because when you're at a smaller studio, you get to do everything, man. So like my very first gig was painting pixelated rocks in a 16-bit Game Boy Advance He-Man game. And then Terminator 3 on the Game Boy Advance. I art directed that because there was only me and one other guy that was doing the art for the whole game. And well, I guess technically the director was also an artist. So there were only 5 people making this game. And it was such a joy to make, totally different work environment when there's 5 people. And then I went on to work at Capcom, where I did voice acting, character design, environment concept art, storyboards, cinematics directing, and script writing for the script of the game. And so like those were really exciting roles. You can't do that when you go to a place like Blizzard. I remember like talking to the director of, I forget even who it was, but the people who were casting for the voice acting roles, and they were like, yeah, nah. We don't want you on there. But I had already shipped one game as a voice actor, and I think I did a pretty solid job. That was Kyle Travers from Final Fight Streetwise. So that was a really cool experience. And small studios are my favorite. I love working with small indie game dev studios, or at least teams that operate like small indie game dev studios. Let's go to the next question. What would you say is the biggest turnoff for people who are trying to follow this line of work? The biggest turnoff, I think, is the idea that you're not going to get what you think you're going to get out of it. When you hear that, sometimes younger people get upset about it. It's like, well, I didn't go to art school for 4 years to get in, house and just be a cog in a machine. Well, guess what? You got to be a cog in a machine for a long time at a big studio. So that's another reason why I recommend either starting an indie game studio or working for an indie game studio or a smaller game dev studio, because you're going to have a lot more value there. At a big game studio, a lot of times concept artists are just treated like bubblegum. It's like, they kind of get to use you up, and then they throw 5 other concept artists at the problem, and whatever is the most popular concept or prettiest painting wins and gets into the game. But that's not really a very good criteria, and it burns out your team very quickly. But they don't care, because there are other concept artists that can just be thrown into that spot. So everybody competing for the top slot is like the worst place to be. I'd rather be kind of like on the outside, the fringes, doing my own thing and setting my own trends. Because of that, I saw so many people climb over each other, and there's a lot of, let's just say that there is some politicking that goes on, and some betrayals. And, when there's a lot of money involved and a lot of prestige, you're going to have people who are trying to get you out of there so they can get in. And so like that can be very discouraging to people who really just want to make great games, right? And if you're really just passionate about making great games, again, be careful of the studio that you try to apply to. And I think that's the biggest turnoff, I think, that most people are going to face, is the politics of things, and the extreme replaceability that artists can sometimes be treated with. And by no means am I saying indie studios are all nice and friendly. I can rattle off a few horrible experiences that friends have had at these smaller studios too. So do your research. Check out a website called Glassdoor, and you can do some research on what employees, current and past employees, think of their employers, and find out whether or not they're a good company to work at. Question number 6. Would you say that this career path lets you balance work and your social life? Or would you say that this career path lets you balance your personal life? Mine does now, because I own my own business. But the way I got my first job, I don't think this was the reason, but because I had a pretty high portfolio, and I was a styling dude, but the reason I think that I got that job was because I told them I don't have a dog, I don't have a family, I don't have a wife, I don't have kids. I don't have a mortgage. I can basically be here all day long. And they were like, great, that's what we need. Somebody who will be our one-stop shop. And that's how I think that lent itself to getting my first gig. Nowadays, I think there are a lot of very sensitive people who do not want to work late hours, and they've raised enough of a ruckus that they don't have to anymore. And that's good in the sense that people are less exploited, artists are less exploited, but it's bad in the sense that now it takes longer for games to get made, and it's harder to count on the rest of your team to get their work done too. So I would say that this is something that has gotten better for the artist in the game industry, the work-life balance thing. But, me saying that right now, there's some guy out there or some girl out there right now that's working at a game studio for they're on their 15th hour of the day and they're planning to sleep under their desk and they're going, what are you talking about? Question number 7, who are some of your inspirations? Now, I got my start working in video games in 2002, 2003. And the people I was looking at the time were guys like Akihiko Yoshida and Tetsuya Nomura, but not as much, I would say, as like Yoji Shinkawa. And you know what the irony of all of these guys are? I find out once I'm working in games that doing real concept art is nothing like what they did. They were working in concept art at a time when you could draw out a cool design on a napkin. And if you look at Nomura's early designs, it's like, it's not crazy, it's not like crazy detailed or over the top, but for its time, it's like, well, there wasn't any such thing as a character designer for games. Like, this is just the best artist we got on the team. And digital art wasn't really even a thing as much. It was like just coming to the forefront. Wacom had just come out in like the mid 90s, So my point is that the people I was looking up to at the time, were probably very different than, who anybody I would recommend would look up to now. Not that those people aren't legends. They are legends in their field and incredible illustrators, I think, especially Yoji Shinkawa, especially Akihiko Yoshida. I still look up to them, and there's a lot of guys that I look up to, but I find that I look up more to businessmen and illustrators these days more. People who are running their own independent comics or indie game studios, people who are running their own IPs, they're IP creators, like Shiro Masamune or something like that. These are people who create entire worlds and then the games are built around them. And that's sort of what I'm doing now when I do my art books. It's as if I'm creating my own world. So that's, I think, where a lot of concept artists aim to go. But I don't want to speak for everybody else. It's just something that I found. And a lot of my friends are like, oh man, I wish I could just do that, art books and build my own worlds, So, the earliest inspirations I had were comic book creators like Todd McFarlane and the early Image guys. And they really kind of like took the power out of the hands of the publishers and said, you know what, we're going to do it ourselves. And I always admired that as a young, impressionable young man. It was like, oh man, I could own my own worlds. I could own my own IPs. And then, I actually was able to do that at a young age. And so I never really was able to shake that. I never really handled being an employee very well at all because I've always thought of myself as more of a creator. The people I always looked up to were far more independent, like very independent people. Okay, so last question. What other resources or people would you suggest that someone starting off in this career should check out? In the concept art world, I would suggest that there's really only a few. First of all, there are a lot of like just art channels on YouTube, which are just kind of silly comedy channels that are very entertaining. And that's fun. It's like, hey, art should be fun. But they're not as educational about the reality of doing concept art for games, for instance. Another resource that I would recommend is FZD, or the Feng Zhu School of Design. He does a YouTube channel. He also has a art school. I've actually hired several concept artists directly out of FZD because he teaches the actual process of concept art and conceptual design. Now, I don't think he gives everything away on his YouTube channel, but it's a great resource for you to start asking more questions. There aren't many others. I don't think I've ever found an actual art book that was like how to make concept art for games. Again, my workshops and some of the workshops that I've seen from professional concept artists might be your best resources. I would check out Ralph Grassetti is doing some really interesting stuff where he goes straight to 3D. And I do think that that's probably, if you're in art school and you're thinking you're going to do concept art, start learning some 3D because that's going to be the future of concept art. If you want to get into illustration, that's a little different, but you should probably learn a little bit of 3D anyway. So I would recommend you to look up specific artists that you really like. You like the way that they communicate, or you like the kind of art style that they do, or you like the games that they've worked on, and look up to see if they've got workshops on how they actually do that. Not the flashy stuff, but the real stuff, the in the trenches stuff, the dirt and grime and all the long form kind of like breakdowns, the real-time videos. You know, I try to make a lot of that stuff available over on my Gumroad channel, and there's a reason for that. But anybody who's bought my workshops on Gumroad will tell you that's where the meat and potatoes is, and that's what most real concept artists are going to do. So that about wraps up probably the most commonly asked questions that you might have if you're a student and your teacher said, hey, take these questions and present them to a pro. Well, this thereby helps many more people than just yourself. And I hope that you could pass this on to anybody else who is an art school student. Maybe they could just find a way to say the same thing slightly differently, and you guys could kind of plagiarize off of what I've just told you and then turn that in, but said slightly differently so that you don't get in trouble. And tell your art teachers to stop. Just tell them, just make them play this video to your class, okay? Because it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Okay, if you have any more questions that I didn't answer, I do a weekly channel. This is what I do. This is my job. I'm a YouTube artist. I finally accept it. That's my job. It's what I really do. So every week and sometimes more, I answer your questions. I show you processes. I show you new tools. I show you how to use them. I show you nifty tricks like my recent watercolor secrets, my ultra secret watercolor techniques. I got all kinds of goodies up in this channel, up in this mug. So why don't you subscribe and tell your art school friends to subscribe as well? You know what? And I will see you guys in the next video. Again, if you have questions, drop those below. I cover them all the time. So lay it on me, bro. All right. Later, dudes. If you are a digital artist and you are interested in learning some of my uber secret tricks and tips and cheats, specifically one of the things that a lot of people had been telling me is that they feel like their art, it's just too slow to get progress on their artwork. So I just recently finished a Photoshop cheat box. It's called the Legendary Photoshop Cheat Box. And it's because it's just that. It's basically the most down and dirty tricks that you can use to literally double your speed with painting. These are all the things that I wish I knew back when I was working on Warcraft and Diablo and League. So pick up this set of real-time videos over on my Gumroad channel and double your speed. All right, dudes, that's it for me on this one. I'll catch y'all money on the bone and a ciao, baby. Yeah.